Hello. The Economic Society SRCC is proud to present its maiden edition of Resource Open House, a series to broaden the horizons of learning. For today's session, Ms. Monica Hallan has agreed to share her insights about personal finance and the markets. Having run 4 successful and impactful TV series around personal finance advice and authored the bestseller Let's Talk Money, there is no one better than Ms. Hallan to guide us today. We are in the middle of a crisis that we could not have expected in any way or form. In unprecedented times like these, we struggle with understanding how to use our resources efficiently. I'd like to request Ms. Hallan to make her opening remarks so that we can start a discussion on personal finance in the times of adversity.
I am delighted to be speaking to all of you. I don't know if you know, but I passed out of Eco Honors SRCC 1989. Probably before a lot of you were born, I had already passed out of the college. So it is really fantastic to be addressing students of this college. I mean, I had a wonderful time there. I still remember the samosas and the coffee. So it was great. Um, yeah, so it is an event that none of us has foreseen. I've been writing on money, I've been researching, thinking about, talking about, but nothing has prepared us for this epidemic, pandemic. We've had disasters before, right? We've had the global, well, North Atlantic financial crisis. We've had this whole Brexit. We've had tsunamis. We've had earthquakes. We've had all kinds of events, but it's always been localized. Even something like a North Atlantic financial crisis, India was not really badly hit through that. This is one event where there's nowhere to hide. There's pretty much nowhere you can go because there's nowhere to hide. And also, it's a strange situation because whereas other crises come because of a problem in the business or because banks are over leveraged or there is some market failure, here governments are putting businesses into a coma. It's like we are all in a self-induced coma, hoping this thing passes by. We just want enough to stay alive. So when this crisis passes by, we revive ourselves and get ready for living again. The biggest hit is, of course, going to be on the economy. Now, I just want to put this in context because I know a lot of young people, especially, have this question that did India do the right thing in such a severe lockdown, right? So there is this example of Trump saying that we are open for business, and the UK saying that we will build herd immunity, and Sweden has taken the view that we will not do a lockdown, we'll see what happens. Now, this is one of those moral questions of how you value life and what are you willing to do in terms of your decisions today. So that you have a lever, you can turn the lever and turn the trolley to a siding where there's one person standing who will get killed. So if you do nothing, the trolley kills 5 people, but you have a lever and you can get the trolley to move there and one person gets killed. Now, what should you do? 5 lives over one, right? Most people would say yes, one, but that one person is your son now, right? So if you extend that argument and say that every life is precious, then we are at this trolley problem saying that what are we saying that it's okay to lose 1 million Indians because that will be the hit, at least 1 million Indians, if not more. Or are we going to do what it takes to keep the disease at bay and then figure out how we'll revive the economy? So I think we've done extremely well in terms of our moral decision. Whether there can never be a perfect world that not a single person will get affected. There'll be no migrants who are unhappy. There are no people who are not going to lose jobs. You will never have a perfect solution. But given the constraints that the country had with a very decaying Medicare system, knowing that if 500 million people showed up at hospitals which don't exist, the fatality rate would be far higher than the 1% projected. So considering all these things, I think we've done extremely well in the lockdown, but there is going to be a problem in terms of the economy. And our response cannot be the response of countries with a per capita income of $45,000 or $70,000. We are a $2,000 per capita income country. Our response will have to take into account what we have, what we can spend. And also remember, we are not a hard currency country. The dollar is a store of value, which means that the Fed can go on printing currency. They can go on putting money into the system because the dollar globally is held at your level, at the individual level. This is going to be a very worrying time because by the time your cohorts start graduating, so we don't know what the job markets are going to be looking like. So it is going to be, if you have 2 years left and if you do plan to go for higher studies, this would be a great time to rework what you want to do in the future, because the world will look a little different. There will be very deep hits in the way certain jobs are done. Let me take one example. So when the pandemic gets over, we'll probably go back to living the way that we used to live. A lot of it, I mean, memories are short. We'll just go back after a couple of years. But the way capital is deployed will change dramatically. Now, firms have realized that remote working is entirely possible. So why would a company pay rent on 40,000 square feet in Mumbai when it only needs 5,000? So entities like commercial real estate, for instance, the brokerages, we may see a huge downturn. And the same thing will happen with travel. I mean, look, I don't need to come to North Campus. We can do this like this. I don't need to, this whole travel across the world for conferences, for meetings, I think it's going to dramatically shift. So airlines, hospitality, real estate, a lot of the sectors are going to be re-rated. So understand the investing question, okay? Frame the question properly, because if you frame a question properly, you get nearly a good answer. Okay, there's never a perfect answer. You get a better answer if your question is framed correctly. This choice of investing of stocks versus bonds, gold versus stocks, is deeply flawed, because what you'd want to use is an and not an or. It is stocks and bonds and gold, because it's a portfolio. So the analogy that I love to use is that when you eat, you don't eat only roti or you don't eat only rice. There is also dal, there's vegetables, there's pickle, there's a whole lot of food which represents different attributes. So if meat is giving you protein or dal is giving you protein, then the carbohydrates are in the roti and the rice. The pickle is giving you that flavor kicker. Just if you eat one thing, it's neither good for your health nor would you like the taste. Similarly, your financial portfolio is a mixture of different asset classes. Equity gives you growth. The debt part, which is bonds, fixed deposits, PPF, EPF, all the secure, the fixed interest, the fixed return products give you stability. That's the core of your portfolio. It gives you safety. Gold is a very good inflation hedge. 5 to 10% of your portfolio through ETFs or the sovereign bonds is gold. So at every time that you're holding this portfolio, and the composition between equity and debt really depends upon how far your goals are and how old you are. The rule of thumb that we like to use is 100 minus your age. If you're 25, 75% is in equity and 25 is in debt. And then of course you can carve out 5% for gold out of each. The PPF investment decision is your base level decision, because this is a gift to the Indian middle class by the government. Financial products are taxed. So you are taxed on the interest that you accumulate or the profit, and at exit also there can be a tax. This PPF is called exempt, which means when you invest your 1.5 lakh in the PPF, you get a tax deduction. Okay, so your tax liability it's calculated on 1.5 lakh less. So the income that you're offering up to tax is less. So you get a reduction in the tax that you have to pay. The interest which accumulates on the PPF is tax free. When you get your money as a lump sum at the end of 15 years, that money is tax free. So it's a gift of the government to the Indian middle class, because here you have an exempt product. And if you have the income, you should definitely try and maximize the benefit and just stay with PPF long term. If your asset allocation is correct, if you are invested with the right intention, if you have a 5 to 7 year horizon, then when markets fall, you actually buy more. And this is what we are seeing right now in India.
Okay. So, I mean, as a trend that is noticed with younger investors, you like seldom find them investing money in things like gold, even though it is like it's a safer investment compared to others. Why do you think that is?
I think probably you people think it's a little boring to buy gold because your parents like gold. So, it's this whole rebellion that my dad likes FTs and gold. I'm not going to be buying that stuff, which is fine. I mean, you can have a little bit of gold and your parents probably have enough gold for you guys, which is fine. Um, but I think what happens, especially at this age, is also the desire to quickly multiply your money. And then there are all these seminars who tell you technical investing and how to catch the market and all of that. Again, if you have a knack for it, it's fine. But the golden rule of money is that there are no free lunches, and if a deal looks too good to be true, it is too good to be true. So what works for somebody else may not work for you. And if there is somebody who's charging 10,000 bucks and giving you a tutorial on technical analysis, promising that you'll make money, you would wonder why he's taking 10,000 when he himself can make crores if he has the smart magic formula. So I'm a little suspicious of people who promise supernormal returns because he has this unique scheme or a unique way of approaching the markets. I think investing is extremely boring. It's extremely, you needn't spend too much time thinking once you've figured out your basic asset allocation. And there is a disproportionate amount of buzz around people who make multi-baggers. But if you notice, people never talk about their losses, right? They will only talk about their wins. So a favorite question of mine when, at a party, people are saying, oh, I made this much on that stock. So my question is that, so what is your portfolio return? And then there's this stunned silence because they don't want to talk about their portfolio return, because that portfolio return probably lags the Sensex. So you can talk about one winner or two winners, but out of the 20 stocks that you hold, what about the other 18?
Like you were mentioning earlier, there would now also be a change in the way we approach workplaces. So in the sense that now people would prefer having smaller offices and just working remotely. So do you think that would also change the real estate market in any way? Or do you think like companies could now use that kind of money or those assets to start or to boom their businesses again?
Possibly. I think it's entirely possible that firms who don't need large office spaces, so there is one working paper at NBER which calculates that 34% of US jobs can be done from home. So that's 34%. I don't think the numbers would be so different in India. A lot of the resistance to allowing people to work from home used to be by the bosses, because you don't know what they're doing at home, you don't know productivity levels. And a lot of bosses like to hold that darbar where everyone is there and you are the big guy. This has sort of just blown that into bits. It's entirely possible to work from home. It's entirely possible to measure productivity. And capitalists, the people who actually own the business, will now start to think, why do I want to invest in so much real estate when I could use this for maybe better IT services? And then there is money left over, which either goes to starting a new business or just as a reserve for the future. So absolutely, especially in the commercial real estate, I'm expecting quite a downturn. And on the other side, if we are supposed to be working from home, I would imagine that we would want homes which are more conducive to work. You want a space where you don't have the pressure cooker whistling or the doorbell, or You want a different space.
Okay. We have another question from the audience from Shivam Agarwal. He's asked, instead of buying gold ETFs or mutual funds or even solid gold, he's thinking of buying sovereign gold bonds issued by the RBI. Is that a sound investment?
Sovereign gold bonds are fantastic for two extra reasons. One is that gold doesn't give dividends, rents, or interest. Okay, so it's an inert investment as such. When you buy real estate, you get rent. When you buy stocks, you get dividend. A bank account gives you an interest. Gold gives you none of these, except that the sovereign gold bonds give you interest. The government wants to incentivize people to move away from physical gold into paper gold. So you get this incentive of a 2.5% interest. This number keeps changing, so you should check. I think it's 2.5% in the latest tranche. You should buy it if you don't need the money for 7 years. They have a lock-in for 7 years. You can trade them on the market, but you don't get good prices. So this is really money that you don't need for 7 full years. It is good for another reason, that at the end of the 7 years, if gold prices are higher than the price that you bought it for, you don't have to pay capital gains. So there is a whole tax impact of investments. So capital gains on equity is 10% now. And on gold, otherwise it is, so there's a short-term rate and a long-term rate. But on the sovereign gold bonds, there is no capital gains. So it's a great idea, but you should just remember that it's not, that money is not going to be with you for 7 years.
And I'm considering how most of our audience today is undergraduate students. How would you propose that we invest our money when we start earning money soon? How do you think we should invest? And what are some tips that you'd like to give to us?
When you start earning, the absolutely first product you build is something I call an emergency fund. Now, no class teaches you this. They all talk about retirement planning. They talk about all kinds of trade-offs between stocks and bonds. But it's a very practical thing that I will tell you, that what you need, the first thing that you do is to put away 6 months of living costs in either a fixed deposit or an ultra short-term debt fund or a conservative balanced fund. Because this is money that you will go to when there's a crisis. So once you've built your emergency fund, then you start thinking of what you do next. The second thing is you don't buy insurance plus investment. So there's a lot of sale of ULIPs and endowment plans. Bundling insurance and investment is a really bad idea. You don't do that. When you need life insurance is when you have dependents, otherwise you don't. You buy something called a pure term policy. You don't buy this bundled stuff. It doesn't work for you. It works for the seller. It works for the insurance company. It doesn't work for us. When you start investing, you invest towards a goal. You just don't invest because you want a higher return. So in good investing is really about thinking through when you will need the money for what. So if it is, if you need the money in the next 5 years, that is what will decide what product you use. So if you need the money in the next 5 years, you have very little equity in that. You will not buy too much of stocks or equity funds for that goal. But if your goal, for instance, you want to buy a house maybe 15 years later, then you can have equity in that portfolio. So you have to flip investing into this chase for return into trying to fulfill goals.